city council members in attendance tonight. We have Mayor Don Gerand here. Don, could you wave? There he is. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bob Keller. Bob, thank you. Councilmember Tom Hornish. Thank you. Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama in the front. Councilmember Christy Malchow. There she is in the back. Thank you. Councilmember Kathy Huckabee. Kathy. And Councilmember Tom Odell. Thank you very much for being here tonight. This meeting will start with an overview of the regulatory process and where we are in that progression. Our Community Development Director, Jeff Thomas, will walk us through that. Next, after that, we will turn the floor over to King County staff to provide an overview of the development of the trail and the related guiding principles, as well as next steps. This discussion will be led by Kevin and Kevin Brown, I'm sorry. I forgot your name, sorry. As you know, this is one of those meetings that is not required as part of our regulatory process. This qualifies as extra effort. So again, thank you for King County for going above and beyond the requirements and joining us here tonight. Before we move forward, I'd like to note the obvious and acknowledge that the trail has often generated a great deal of emotion and frustration. We all know that. So, in the interest of a productive meeting tonight, I hope that all of us will bring as much decorum and goodwill as possible as we go through this important discussion. Having said that, thanks to everyone again for coming tonight, and let's get started. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jeff Thomas, our Community Development Director.
All right, thank you, Lyman. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? All right, I'm a little louder than Lyman, so that's to the advantage tonight. Usually it's not. What we're going to do is we're going to take about 5 minutes here and step you through a few slides up on the screen that will explain where we're at in the processing of the Shoreline Substantial Development Permit, which is the underlying permit approval that's required for South Segment 2B of the trail to move forward. The next step beyond the Shoreline Substantial Development Permit is where we move into construction permits, similar to what we just went through with South Segment 2A, where we had a clear and grade permit, necessary construction permits for that activity to start. So with that, back in October of last year was when the city received the application for Shoreline Substantial Development Permit. That's the last time I'm going to say it. We'll call it SSDP from now on in the rest of this 5 minutes. And after reviewing the materials that were submitted initially, late December was when we were able to go out and begin the public comment period. How many of you actually submitted a public comment to the city during that time? Right? Okay, so get this, we had somewhere north of 1,000 written public comments that were received by the city, and over 800 of those were actually unique comments that were received. So our staff, Lindsay Osbold, who's a project planner here, you may have seen her name on the notices, she had the wonderful task of going through all of those and indexing them and getting them saved into a specific format, getting them basically collated so that we could present them in an orderly fashion to not only folks like yourself that were coming in wanting to see the public comments, but also to turn them over to the county and ask the county to start working through them and formulating some responses and things that they were seeing in the comments that would help inform the project itself. So from there, that comment period ran for 30 days. So it ran from late December to late January. So we received all those comments within that compressed time frame. What have we been doing since then? What we've done since then is the actual application itself. We've been working on going through and reviewing the actual county submittal, the plans, all the documents that were associated with it, the studies and so forth. While that was happening, we were notified by the State Department of Ecology that some changes to what's called our Shoreline Master Program had been approved. And the reason why I bring that up, it's really important. There was a process change that occurred that we had submitted many months ago that affects not only the South Segment 2B SSDP, but also other applicants in the city. How many of you live on a property that has a dock, for example? Anybody? Oh, look, a few of you. Okay. So if you wanted to go build a new dock, an SSDP is a similar type of permit that you would need to get to construct a dock in the shoreline regulatory area, 200 feet of the lake, not only Lake Sammamish, but Pine Lake and Beaver Lake as well. So this process change, what it is essentially is an SSDP formally was reviewed and decided upon by yours truly, me, the planning director. The process change that was approved by the Department of Ecology moves it from that type 2 process with the director making the decision to the city's hearing examiner making that decision, and that's a type 4 process, so type 2 to type 4. You ask, well, why do we care about that? What does that mean? For an SSDP type 2 process, what we were doing formally, we would do a written public comment period like we did in January, but now with the type 4 process, the hearing examiner actually conducts an open record public hearing. So that's similar to, for example, subdivision applications in the city. Those go to the hearing examiner, they have for many years now, for decision. And the hearing examiner conducts an open record public hearing. You get to come out and testify and give your thoughts to the hearing examiner. So type 2 to type 4. That process change occurred and became effective on March 1st, 2017. So the rest of this process for the SSDP will follow that, and once we get to the point where we're ready for staff to make a recommendation to the hearing examiner, the hearing examiner will be scheduling an open record hearing. Okay, so then as we move along here, that process change occurred while we were actually reviewing the submittal. On April 12th, we transmitted to the county. We actually transmitted all the public comments a few weeks before that, but on April 12th, the city transmitted its comprehensive first technical review of the application for the SSDP back to King County. So the application and the comments are now back with King County, and they're working through the city's technical reviewers' questions and comments, and we look forward to their response that will be forthcoming ideally within 90 days. And then that will be back on the city to review that, make final determinations, and then we'll start formulating our recommendation for the city's hearing examiner. A couple last things I'll mention here. Our city code sets out some targets for processing applications. In the case of an SSDP, it specifically sets out a 120-day target timeframe for reaching a decision. Primarily due to the large volume. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen a project that had as many written public comments as we've had for this. So we exceeded the 120 days. We're required by code to notify the public and notify the applicant that we've done that and the reasons for that. And that transmittal we coincidentally sent on April 12th to the county as well as to the public. So last slide we'll cover here. Where can I get information on this project? On the city's website, we've done a great job, our planning staff and our IT staff here at City Hall, and working with the county on getting the most up-to-date information on our city's website. So this is a screenshot actually from our website. And as things move along, we are updating it and we are uploading documents as well for folks to take a look at. All of the public comments are uploaded on the city's website now, and other technical documents that are part of the application. So with that, that concludes where we're at in the process currently. So bottom line, it's ongoing, and there's still quite a bit of work to do, but we've invested here at City Hall a lot of time and a lot of energy into getting the first review done and going through all the public comments and indexing them and so forth. So it's been a big effort. We have a small staff, and we've had to make some changes in some of our workloads to be able to accommodate this, but I'm really proud of our staff and the job that we've done so far, and we continue to move forward. With that, I'd like to invite King County Parks Director Kevin Brown up, and I think we're going to move into the county portion of the presentation. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to come out tonight. I've been out several times to give project updates, and it's always been a great opportunity to share ideas, share concerns. This is a challenging project. This is an emotional project. But first, let me say thanks to the council members in particular for providing this venue. City staff, Lyman, Jesse, Jeff, Tawny, lots of folks have participated. We've developed great relationships, but again, at sometimes challenging relationships on a project that we're getting close to completing. So I've got a presentation tonight. It's roughly a half hour, which is going to be followed by an open house. And the background to this project, actually to this presentation, I'm hoping my clicker works. Good, good. So tonight we're going to be giving an introduction on King County Parks in our regional trail system, just a little bit about what we do as an agency. We'll talk about the East Lake Sammamish Trail Project history and timeline. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about our guiding principles for regional trails, and then next steps with respect to the project, and then holding an open house for questions to staff as well. So with that, I want to talk about why we're here tonight. And earlier this year, on January 10th, there was a city council meeting where several questions came up with concerns, just information that folks wanted with respect to this project, and questions they wanted to have answered. So there were 21 comments that evening, and unfortunately we didn't have the opportunity to be there that evening, but we wanted to provide a response. And so we've worked with city staff to develop what we hope are responses to these questions. And so I'm going to highlight them quickly. Does King County have the rights to build this trail? According to the survey that's been recently done, my house is within the public corridor. We feel that we're paying taxes on land within the corridor at this time. We're concerned that drainage could impact our property. King County should perhaps reduce the trail width to eliminate some of the impacts. I have concerns as to how wetlands are classified. I have concerns about emergency vehicle access to my neighborhood. And I'd like to find out more about the timeline and process for this project. So over the course of my presentation, I'm hoping to answer all of these questions. But in addition, as part of the open house process, we do have handouts that further talk about many of these issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about what King County Parks does as an agency. We are a relatively large agency in the region. We have roughly 200 parks and facilities across King County, which goes from Vashon Island to Snoqualmie. We manage roughly 28,000 acres of open space in fee, and then we have another 100,000 of easement lands that we manage. And we have about 175 miles of regional trails. At the same time, we have some one-of-a-kind facilities like our Cottage Lake Skills Course that you see on the right, Cougar Mountain Park, which is about 3,000 acres in the middle of the county. And on the lower right, we manage the King County Aquatic Center. It's an internationally known venue that supports Olympic caliber events. We often get large international and national events there as well. With respect to trails, as mentioned, we manage about 175 miles of trails, and many of those corridors are similar to what we have with respect to being rails to trails corridors as the East Lake Sammamish Trail. Examples include the East Side Rail Corridor, which extends from Renton to Woodinville, the Cedar River Trail from Renton to Maple Valley, the Sammamish River Trail, the Snoqualmie Valley Trail, and also the Burke-Gilman Trail as well. What is a regional trail from the county's perspective? As mentioned, we have lots of trails. These trails are designed and maintained as paved surfaces or soft surfaces with the intention to connect neighbors, communities, and cities, provide opportunities to exercise and recreate, and provide non-motorized transportation. And generally speaking, when we talk about the quality of life in this region, we see regional trails as a big part of that. One of the questions that has come up is, why is King County developing this trail? And we have been developing regional trails for the last 40, 50 years. And in fact, this particular trail corridor has been identified since the early 70s within our trails plans and has been updated in multiple versions of our trails plan since then. A little bit of the timeline specific to the project itself. In 1996, BNSF, Burlington Northern, they ceased railroad operations within the corridor. And within 2 years, we worked with one of our nonprofit partners to acquire the corridor. And that was shortly followed by an extensive planning process. We brought together many stakeholders from the region, from the city, to develop a plan for moving forward with the corridor. And in 2006, we opened up the interim soft surface gravel corridor that was in place for several years. However, in 2011, we undertook our first phase. We have what we consider 5 phases or 5 segments of this trail corridor. The first segment that we constructed was in Redmond, and you'll see that to the far left up there, before and after photos of that. That was shortly followed by a segment that we constructed within the city of Issaquah. And then our first segment within the city of Sammamish was the North Sammamish segment to the right. This slide, again, highlights the project history and timeline. You'll see the Redmond segment, the Issaquah segment, the North Sammamish segment. The second from the bottom is the South Sammamish segment, which is currently under construction right now. And the South Sammamish segment B segment, what we're talking about tonight, is in final design phase right now. So one of the greatest benefits of a regional trail in our regional trail system is the connectivity across this region. And when you look at this map, you can see the other regional trails that take in the north portion of this county, the northwest portion of this county, in particular the Burke-Gilman, the East Side Rail Corridor, the Sammamish Valley Trail. But more importantly is the connectivity that you see within the East Lake Sammamish Trail to neighboring cities. It connects Issaquah, Sammamish, and the city of Redmond. There's going to be a light rail station at the north end of this trail in 2022. It connects employment centers, provides folks an opportunity to commute to work from Sammamish to Redmond or Issaquah. And 2 of the largest recreation areas in this county are located at the north and south end of the trail. The Lake Sammamish State Park at the south end and Redmond and Marymore Park at the north end. And between those 2 parks, they realize roughly 5 million visitors a year. And with respect to connectivity, once the project is complete, it's going to result in a 44-mile regional trail corridor linking Puget Sound to East King County and Cascade Foothills. So as mentioned early in the outline, we're going to be talking about guiding principles for regional trails. And the first one that we're going to talk about is safety, because that's critical. It's one of the concerns that has been brought up numerous times with respect to trail users as well as adjacent property owners and trail crossings. Regional trails are essential public facilities under Washington's State Growth Management Act. And when we design for safety, we're following standards that have been established at the federal level. With respect to the 12-foot wide paved width here, when we did the environmental impact statement and went through the master planning process back in 2006 to 2010, there were lots of conversations about what the trail width would be. And it had actually, there were conversations of up to a 30-foot wide trail. And what was settled upon was this 12-foot paved path that sort of met the needs and the growing requirements for this region. So this next bullet talks about anticipating that future use and growth. Anyone that's been here for a bit recognizes the tremendous growth in not just these 3 cities, but across this entire county and region. That growth is not going to stop anytime soon. And when we design our trails for safety, we're taking into consideration pedestrians, personal assist vehicles, bicycles, as well as vehicle crossings on the corridor. This slide provides a cross-section of what the trail would look like when fully developed. And you'll see this in the north section, North Sammamish section, Redmond and Issaquah. And we are following national standards with respect to making sure these trails are as safe as can be. So with some of the bullets here, you'll see that at intersections, we're trying to keep sight lines nice and clear for both vehicles and trail users. We're putting in textured concrete at both the intersection as well as 75 feet from the intersection. So folks know that an intersection is coming and they can tell the difference both by texture and by visibility. You'll see signage and bollards and striping here as well. We want to make sure that this is a safe crossing for everybody, and as we get close to these intersections, safety is paramount, and you'll see some additional features at intersections in particular that do focus on safety. Another concern that we have heard was making sure that emergency access is available for emergency vehicles. So we're designing to ensure that access for emergency vehicles is in place. Any changes to driveways and access points are being reviewed by Eastside Fire and Rescue. And like all of our trails, we always provide the emergency service providers with keys to our bollards so they have access to get down the trail as they need to. As Jeff spoke a little about with respect to permits and approvals, regional trails are complex projects to design, develop, and permit. And on this page, you'll see just a flavor of the permitting and regulatory requirements that we go through when we're designing these trails. At the federal level, we're working with the Federal Highway Administration, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. At the state level, we're working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Ecology, as well as Historic Preservation. And locally, we're working to ensure that we're following all of the guidelines and the codes of the cities by which we're developing within. In particular to the East Lake Sammamish Trail, we've ensured that we followed code that Redmond, Issaquah, and Sammamish all have in place. Examples, in particular on segment 2B. With this project, we have 8 passable culverts, fish passable culverts, Zacchaeus Creek, Pine Lake, Ebright, George Davis, and other streams. A great benefit of this requirement is there's a kokanee run that goes from Lake Sammamish up to many of the streams in this area. So it provides multiple benefits, this compliance requirement. In addition, we are going to be updating our trail design. At the end of last year, the city updated their stormwater design manual, and we'll be updating our design to ensure that we comply with that. And as we look at mitigation, there are several agencies that sort of dictate how mitigation needs to take place, whether it be the Department of Ecology or working with the city of Sammamish. So we'll be addressing those impacts to critical areas and looking to improve both ecological and habitat function within the corridor. So one of the most important factors for us, as it is for you, is being a good neighbor. And I think this is one of the most emotional issues that we've been working through, is how do we work together? How do we ensure that we're all trying to achieve the best possible result out there? So first and foremost is communication. As we started design on segment B, one of the questions was, how do we make sure that people have an opportunity to talk with folks about how this project might impact them directly, as well as their community? So in January of this year, we worked with city staff to have King County Park staff come to City Hall and be able to work here for several weeks to work with you on any questions or comments that you may have had. And I know there were many, many folks that took that opportunity to get questions answered about how the trail design and future project might impact them directly. In addition, for this project, we've had a hotline available, in which we provide both email and phone responses. This was used just this past weekend for an issue that has come up. So park staff are pretty responsive to any requests for information that do come in. We frequently do newsletter mailings and email alerts. If you've had the opportunity to visit our website, there's a tremendous amount of project information, a tremendous amount of information about what the scope of each phase is, where we're at, project milestones, and next steps. So if you haven't had the chance and you do have some questions, that might be a good first resource. As we get to construction during the project, we give weekly updates to folks to let them know how things are going, if there's any issues to be aware of in particular, and how construction is taking place. Another thing that we're looking at is, being a good neighbor also means that ensuring that all of the development for the trail does take place within the corridor. And we want to make sure that we're not impacting your private property without your permission. So as you look at this, that's a priority for us. As the trail does get constructed, trail maintenance and trail vegetation, we continue to make sure that it's well maintained. You have a nice aesthetic corridor passing through your community. We're ensuring that there's always going to be vehicle access for adjacent property owners across the trail. First and foremost, we know many folks have to cross it, and we want to make sure that access to your home is always available. And signage for safety. We want to make sure that everyone respects the adjacent property owners, as well as the uses that take place within the trail corridor. And so we do sign it appropriately. Stewardship of public lands and resources. This is going to be our most challenging issue. And, as we've talked about earlier, it's an emotional project. And there's no sugarcoating some of the impacts that it has on adjacent property owners, as well as some of the uses that are taking place out there. So as we walk through this section, we're going to be talking about the corridor and land management within this corridor. As I mentioned when we first started this evening, we manage roughly 28,000 acres of open space, 175 miles of trails, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of adjacent property owners who we work with and have a good relationship across this system. At the same time, we as an agency have the responsibility to protect the public's investment for the public use and enjoyment of parks. Similar to any park agency, to include the city of Sammamish, Redmond, making sure that you're stewarding the investment that the public has made is critical. With respect to this particular corridor, to date, we've spent tens of millions of dollars in terms of acquiring, planning, designing public processes and constructing the phases to date within this corridor. And we're tasked with ensuring that unauthorized private use within the corridor is something that we work with property owners on and address. And sort of what's at the core of this issue for us is, you have to remember, this is a rail-banked corridor that could at some point in time revert back to the railroad. So it's our responsibility to protect the integrity of that corridor if reversion rights are ever necessary moving forward. One of the questions that was brought up earlier was King County's rights to develop a trail within that corridor. And there's been two separate rulings in the U.S. District Court in 2015 and 2016 that speak to this. King County has the exclusive use and possession of the corridor, and King County owns either a fee simple or railroad easement along the entire length. And King County has full use of the easement within the corridor. Now, we know this will continue to be an issue that potentially folks may have, but at its core, we do believe we have the right, based on our court rulings, to develop a trail, and the rights that were given us by the Transportation Safety Board under the Rails to Trails Act.
Will you address the statements made to the owners in this lawsuit made to us in 2004?
So there will be an opportunity for questions during the open house process. Thanks. Okay. You can ask me during the open house process, yes.
After meeting everyone in our lawsuit, we're going to have a specific discussion with Kevin.
So as we prepared to develop segment B, 2B of this trail, we wanted to make sure that we had a good idea of the property boundaries for both our purpose and for the adjacent property owner's purpose. Just a better understanding for all in terms of where those property lines are. And so in doing so, many of you may have noticed our survey crews that were out there. We got several questions about who was out there, what they were doing, and we tried to provide as much information ahead of time to let folks know that they were going to be there, but questions still came up after that process. So as a result of that survey, one of the challenges is that within this particular segment, we do have roughly 147 properties that have encroachments that are going to impact the trail construction. And as we've looked at the entire corridor and we're looking at our land management practices, there's roughly an additional 250 other properties that we want to work with owners on with respect to encroachments onto the public land. Now, the reason for this, as I mentioned before, is that we have a requirement to steward the public's investment in public land, but more importantly, it's state law. It's illegal for us to provide a property owner or an individual a gift of public funds or a gift of public property.
Can you clarify what that is?
Sure, I sure can. So the following slides, I'm going to give some examples of what some of these are that are within the corridor. Here you'll see this particular slide points out one area in particular where on the right you'll see the corridor highlighted in green. And within that corridor you'll see a sport court and a children's play area to the right, and a large hedge that sort of serves as a privacy hedge. Across the trail, you'll see additional structures that have been developed within the corridor that, again, had not been permitted. So this is a good example of something that we see up in... That is not a house on the west side. Okay. Well, and if it is permitted, I'll speak to that a little bit later in my presentation. Another example of an area that we've seen is, again, on the far left, you'll see the public corridor highlighted in yellow on both sides. In this particular area, a private beach club has been established with fencing to keep the public out. And you'll see the fencing and the signage that has been installed there as well. And it's our priority, where available, is to reclaim those waterfront access points for the public to enjoy. Another example that you'll see as well is, again, you'll see the green corridor highlighted, and several docks that have been established, again, within the rail corridor, landscaping and fencing that minimize the actual trail to a small amount, with the rest being used for private purposes. And when we look at this from, the challenge of gift of public funds, this is a good example of, what we're pressed with. Again, in the yellow, you'll see the individual home, and in the blue, you'll see the amount of public corridor that's been turned into private use. And, just based on assessed value, you're looking at roughly 15,000 square feet. The assessed value for the home is 1.2 million, and the amount of square footage and assessed value for the public property is roughly 1.4 million. And, one of the questions that has come up is, I am paying taxes on this land in the blue. We have gone through much of the corridor to ensure that property owners are not paying any other taxes other than their property. We've made sure that the corridor has not been included in their tax rates. Okay. So I will have, again, I'll be able to get to that question specifically if you do have further questions. So as we look at these issues, we want to work with the neighbors, we want to work with the community on how best to move forward, and figuring out what the options are available, how do we get the issues resolved. We do have a special use permit process within King County. Many people in this room, many people on the corridor do have a special use permit for those uses of the public land that they utilize. To the right, you'll see our code requires a special use permit for any private use of county park property. For access to your home and for utilities, we don't charge any land use fee. You will always have access to your home. You're always going to be guaranteed utilities for your home. All other private uses that are requested, they must be reviewed, and we approve them through our division and with real estate services. For special use permits that are for private uses, we do have land use fees that do apply. There's some information with respect to how to apply and who to contact. We'll also provide some literature if you have further questions at the end of this presentation. So what does this look like before and after with respect to the corridor? On the left, you'll see a situation where there was privacy fencing, vegetation, boats parked within the corridor. With respect to the trail, there was not safe sight distance for either the vehicle driver coming out or park trail users. To the right, you'll see the after, where the boat's been removed. We've provided a safe, clear sight distance, and we've ensured that improvements within the intersection of the trail work both for the vehicle, the driver, and for trail users themselves. So this slide sort of dovetails from the one earlier today. According to the house, my house is within the public corridor. Houses within the corridor will not need to be altered or removed. So if in fact that one particular one was a house, there will be no alterations or removal. We want to work with folks on those properties. We do have, with respect to the property rights to build the trail, there's a statement that will be available. We have a packet of information that helps to give folks the detail on this and several of the other statements below. For example, I'm paying taxes on land within the corridor. We have information for the assessor's office as well. Drainage, we talked a little bit about that and our requirements to work with the city on designing a trail to the 2016 Surface Water Design Manual. Reducing the trail width, talked about the planning process and the reasons behind that 12-foot paved trail width. The classification of wetlands, we have some information here in addition to what I talked about. With respect to emergency vehicle access, the trail is being designed with that in mind, and we are having Eastside Fire and Rescue take a look at all of our design plans. And what is the timeline in the process for moving forward? Our project milestones and next steps, 2017, we had the public comment period, the clarification sessions at City Hall, the comments that were received in February, March. We've just received the comments from the city, and we're working to respond to those. July is when we anticipate having all those comments to the city. Ongoing, we're going to start working with adjacent property owners on special use permits, the application process and compliance. And late 2017 is the release of the 90% design plans and the opening of South Sammamish 2A, which is currently under construction. And in 2018-19, working to receive the issuance of the shoreline and grading permits and release of the 100% construction documents and going to construction later that year. And after that, bringing in other amenities that support the trail, such as parking and rest area at Southeast 33rd Street. So King County Parks in particular has long had a relationship with the city of Sammamish. And I've got projects that we're working. This is not the only project that we're working on with the city. We're doing kokanee projects to improve, again, fish habitat and water quality. We're providing partnerships to access Lake Sammamish at Sammamish Landing. And I think the largest project that we're working on is the Emerald Necklace, where we're working to acquire a 28-mile vision of connected open space and trail that surrounds the city. And just recently, we purchased quite a bit of land at the north end of Soaring Eagle Park in helping to achieve that vision of an emerald necklace around the city, which we've worked long and hard with many stakeholders to include city staff and the council on. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sujata Goyal to talk a little bit about next steps this evening.
Thank you all for being such a good audience. We all really appreciate your attentiveness and listening to what Kevin had to say. My name, again, is Sujata Goyal, and I work for King County Parks, and I'm actually your neighbor to the south in Issaquah, but we'd like to thank you for being here tonight to hear more about the East Lake Sammamish Trail. We hope the information that Kevin presented has provided some clarity around the project and can help move this process forward. Now, we're not going to be taking open public comment tonight. That wasn't part of this open house format. But what we will do is invite you to join us out in the lobby. We have large maps of the corridor, and basically as you exit the lobby, the maps that are here are the north segment, and they work their way toward the south portion of the trail. And these are kind of what the corridor looks like at 60%. We also have additional information outside that speaks specifically to some of these points that Kevin brought up, and some of these handouts that we have more specifically are on some of the issues around the width of the trail, mitigation, wetland delineation, the special use permit process. We also have additional information about where you can go if you have questions about your tax assessments and those sorts of things. And then lastly, the staff is on hand. Most of us are either wearing King County Parks logo wear or something that identifies us as park staff. I think we have 8 or 9 staffers outside that are just kind of milling around, and you can feel free to ask us any of the questions you may have. We aren't going to be accepting formal public comment, like I said earlier, and that our open house goes till 8:30, so we hope we have plenty of opportunity to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.